Today, I'm going to have a word or two, or three or four or more to say about COVID, alias Cyrus the virus, by my terminology. And there was an expression, it's attributed to the French, as many things are, which says the more things change, the more they remain the same. With all that has happened with COVID, there are still people who deny that it's a reality. There are people who refuse the vaccinations, and it goes on and on and on. The virus doesn't care. The virus, if it did care, sees that it has an easy target because human beings, who are supposed to be the only creatures in the universe with the ability to think, the virus will say, well, I don't have really that much to worry about. I refer to the virus as Cyrus. And as you know, or may not, COVID-19, there are coronaviruses. COVID-19 means COVID or coronavirus disease of 2019. And that's how they designate it. Just like the variations or variants, as they call them, will be given a number. For example, BA1, BA2, BA3, and so forth. I'm going to read a rhyme that I wrote some time ago as my lead in, and I have documents and articles I'll read from because I'm not a scientist. Obviously, I'm not a medical professional. Ode to COVID-19. Cyrus the virus, extremely desirous of raging like uncontrolled fire. Cyrus the virus did pen on papyrus, would that all humans expire. Cyrus the virus does not admire us. If it could have its own way, it would inspire us, then would require us by recklessness ourselves to slay. O Cyrus the virus, forget not King Pyrrhus, who dealt the Romans what for? A victory he won, but when all was done, King Pyrrhus lost the war. Cyrus the virus, the fate of King Pyrrhus awaits you if man but relents. Your days are numbered when minds unencumbered embrace medical science and sense. There are many people who won't. So I've got something that relates to Ben Franklin, who refused to allow one of his sons to be inoculated or vaccinated because he was worried about the possible side effects. Benjamin Franklin wrote, quote, in 1736, I lost one of my sons, a fine boy of 4 years old, taken by the smallpox in the common way. I long regretted that I had not given it to him by inoculation, which I mention for the sake of parents. Parents who omit that operation on the supposition that they should never forgive themselves if a child died under it. My example, showing that the regret may be the same either way, and that therefore the safer route should be taken, unquote. Many of the decisions we make each day, by the way, this is from an item by Dr. Arwa Nasser, who is a professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, going on with what he wrote. Many of the decisions we make each day are easy, but medical decisions tend to be harder because the attendant risk is higher. Sometimes we may struggle to decide which is the safer option. Among all the wonders of modern medicine, vaccinations are one of the most miraculous. The eradication of many contagious diseases within the past century has doubled the human lifespan from around 40 years to in 1990 to around 80 years today, and I'm 85, so I went beyond what the average would be for the maximum. And they have prevented more than half of all annual deaths in the US and worldwide. Hundreds of millions of vaccines are administered daily, and a robust side effect tracking system can quickly detect serious side effects. The track record of vaccine safety and efficacy is hard to deny. Despite all of this, there is still much anxiety about the COVID-19 vaccine. Many people are declining to take the vaccine or to give it to their children. Fear of side effects may drive this rejection, but we must be clear that the safer option is determined by the facts and not by fear. The facts are that as of today, more than 350 million doses of COVID-19 vaccine have been administered in the US and multiples of this number around the world. And from all of this, there is no evidence of serious long-term problems. Additionally, since the vaccine was introduced, more than 95% of severe cases and deaths have occurred in unvaccinated individuals. A recent survey showed that 96% of US physicians have opted to get the vaccine and to have their family members do the same. And that's compared to the 50% of the general population. The World Health Organization estimates that the COVID pandemic has claimed more than 4 million lives globally. This tragic number is still a fraction of what it would have been without the millions of vaccines given in the past few months. When one is not sure of what to do, one will often resort to inaction. This, after all, is what Ben Franklin did, but he bitterly regretted that decision. He hesitated to give his son the vaccine, then realized in hindsight that the safer option would have been to give the vaccine. The risk of vaccine side effects is much lower than the risk of the illness itself. Too often, we think the worst is not going to happen to us until it does. And by then, it is too late. And there have been many children, many adults, some with children, who have avoided, for whatever reason or no reason, taking the vaccine. These parents have left children motherless and fatherless because in some cases, both parents were harvested by COVID. There is no excuse for that, and it kind of indicates what George Bernard Shaw said. Parents are the very ones who should not have children. Here is an opinion written by Jeremy Holstein. He is an MD. He's a physician in Lincoln. He was a health advisor in the White House, policy advisor to 2 Nebraska governors, and served on the Board of Regents representing the University of Nebraska Medical Center. Listen to your doctor, not your politician. But this is one time, if you consider me a politician, because more than half of my 85 years, 46 to be exact, were spent in politics. This is one time the politician you're listening to agrees with the doctors who speak intelligently and from knowledge. When politicians voice criticism of the institutions that protect us from disability and death, this should be a cause for alarm. The doctor now. I was recently moved by the story of Shelley Wachter, an unvaccinated Nebraskan recovering from COVID in a Lincoln hospital. She did not get the vaccine because the messaging she was hearing felt political and became what she called white noise, making it difficult to discern the truth. Sorting through the messaging frenzy is hard for parents, patients, and if it has been a nightmare, it has been a nightmare for doctors. It is bizarre that our leaders are failing us in this epochal pandemic. Amazingly, there are still members of Congress who refuse to wear a mask, even as their fellow members and staff have perished from COVID. We have learned some hard lessons from this virus. Some 600,000 US lives lost have taught us that the same measures that protect us from the Alpha virus will protect us from the Delta variant. Today, virtually all of the very sick and dying COVID patients are unvaccinated. That is a fact, not an opinion, not white noise. It is not possible to look at this data and come to a different conclusion. Yet, politicians in the camp of anti-maskers, anti-social distancers, and anti-vaxxers run contrary to the voices of reason coming from the medical community. Our physicians, pharmacists, nurses, and allied health professionals are sharing the same information that is being released by the CDC, that's Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and our local public health departments, simply because it is the best defense we have against the virus. Words matter. And when politicians voice criticism of the institutions that protect us from disability and death, protect us, this should be a cause for alarm. The volley of bombast without second-order thinking that imbues our politics is disruptive, but when it undermines our county, state, and national public health agencies, it is dangerous. Distributing information that is untested, unvetted, and unscientific is irresponsible. To me, it borders on the criminal. It certainly is immoral. We should expect more from our leaders than to burn down the very institutions they fund and are supposed to lead. In the absence of statesmanship, we should listen to our doctors. At the very least, we can listen to Ms. Walker's advice, ignore the politics. I told you I'm going to read some items, and I am not a doctor, not a scientist, but I have sense enough to understand that there are people who studied matters. They have the knowledge, the expertise, and experience to arrive at conclusions that are valid. And those are the people that I listen to. That is what has helped me reach 85 years. And some people say, I don't look it. I look 100. But if I look 100 and you think I'm 100, that's even better and more of an accomplishment than my being 85. Got it? So I'm a winner both ways, either way. This is an item of mine that appeared in the World Herald in November of last year. Irresponsible anti-vax claims mislead Black Nebraskans, and COVID has harvested more Black people than any other group in this country. And we make up, if it's still that ratio, 10% and at most 12% of the population. So we're dying out of all proportion to our numbers, and it's because we won't listen to what we ought to listen to. But I'll read this. Frustration, thy name is COVID-19, AKA Cyrus the virus. Overwhelming is the frustration engendered by the flood of virus misinformation deluging the nation. Being Black, I am particularly perplexed and distressed by the volume of Black people among the deluded, COVID-denying, anti-vaxxer crowd. We are dying daily. During a weekly podcast called The Ernie Chambers Show, regardless of my topic, I preliminarily vent my frustration with Black people who spurn vaccination. Between two people, one of whom speaks only English and the other only Greek, there can be no meaningful oral communication. When in Rome, Due to the deference paid to religion by many in the Black community, I resort to a scripture-based appeal, speaking their language, hopefully, comprising a series of biblical verses. Jesus described you all when he warned, they will not be persuaded though one arose from the dead. Luke 16:31. Jesus said, let them alone. They be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall in the ditch. Matthew 15:14. This goes to the COVID deniers and the anti-vaxxers. Nevertheless, deeming myself to be my brothers and sisters' keeper, I forge onward, echoing prophet Jeremiah's anguished lament. Oh, that my head were waters and my eyes a fountain of tears, that I might weep day and night for my people. Jeremiah 9:1. Followed by, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Hosea 4:16. A horse led to water cannot be forced to drink, and a fool led to school cannot be forced to think. And if the shoe fits, I am reduced to the role of a sower who can merely cast seeds and must rely on other forces to determine if they take root and grow. However, not all is gloom and doom on the COVID front. Heartening is it to witness the enthusiasm of young children eager to get their shot. Continuing the scriptural theme, they may be viewed as the fulfillment of Isaiah's prophet of hope. A little child shall lead them. Isaiah 11:16. May adults be led to heed them. Ernie Chambers. 19. Oh, we're not in that 19s anymore. It's 2022. Despite Ben Franklin's assertion that, quote, little strokes fell big oaks, if I had my druthers, I'd be dealing mighty strokes with the great axe of the legendary giant lumberjack Paul Bunyan against the twin oaks of COVID denial and anti-vaccination claptrap and trumpeting timber. Unfortunately, I don't have that axe, and people still will not listen. There were some Creighton students who went to court to try to overturn Creighton University's requirement that all students at Creighton get a COVID vaccination. Now, Creighton is a Catholic school. The Pope runs the Catholic Church. Catholic doctrine is opposed to abortion. Creighton is a Catholic school opposed to abortion. So listen to this and see how irrational these students are. This is from August of this year, August the 13th. I believe we're still in the month of August. This is an Associated Press item. The Nebraska Supreme Court on Friday dismissed an appeal by a handful of Creighton University students who sought to be exempt from the private Catholic school's COVID-19 vaccine mandate last year, arguing that getting the shots would violate their religious beliefs against abortion. Creighton, as I've stated, is a Catholic school following Catholic doctrine, is opposed to abortion. I guess these students feel they know more than their professors, but anyway, Paul said something like that. I am wiser than my teachers. The state's high court said it did not have jurisdiction, citing its 150-year stance that people cannot appeal orders denying or granting temporary injunctions. A temporary injunction, by the word temporary, lets you know it's not a final order. The U.S. Supreme Court will not deal with anything presented to it, which is not a final order. Continuing. In this case, a judge last year declined to issue a temporary injunction that would have blocked Creighton University's requirement that all students get the COVID-19 vaccination. Quote, because the lower court's denial of a temporary injunction was not a final order, we, the Supreme Court, lack jurisdiction of the appeal and must dismiss it. That's what Justice William Castle wrote for the Supreme Court. The 10 students who sought the injunction said they had religious objections to the vaccines because they, quote, were developed and slashed or tested using abortion-derived fetal cell lines, unquote. Laboratory-grown cell lines descended from fetuses that were aborted decades ago. They were used in some early stage testing of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines and to grow viruses used to manufacture the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The vaccines do not contain fetal cells. The Vatican, the headquarters of the Catholic Church, run by the Pope, declared in 2020 that it is morally acceptable for Roman Catholics to receive COVID-19 vaccines based on research that used cells derived from aborted fetuses when ethically irreproachable. Vaccines that are irreproachable are not available. The only ones that are available are those developed through fetal cells. The Catholic headquarters, the Vatican, said these vaccines can be used. The Pope, who runs the Vatican, said they can be used. Creighton University, a Catholic university, demanded that these vaccines be used. But you have these 10 idiotic students who come up with this crazy stuff they hear wherever they hear this kind of nonsense, and are going to try to make the university change its course. Continuing this article. Douglas County District Judge Marlon Polk said in his September 2021 ruling that he would not order that the mandate be temporarily blocked because he did not think the students would ultimately prevail in court. That's because the students had signed a form promising to get vaccinated once regulators fully approved one, the judge noted. The students appealed that order. An attorney for the students, Robert Sullivan, said Friday that while he wished the state's high court had decided the appeal on its merits, the fact that it was decided on a technicality allows the students to continue their legal fight. No, it was established on the basis of the law. People, when they lose, call it a technicality. The technical blunder was when the students tried to get the Supreme Court to rule on a matter that was not a final order. Their lawyer does not understand the law. Anyway, they can continue that. An attorney for the university did not immediately return a phone message left Friday by seeking comment. There's a verse in the Bible that says, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou be like unto him. The university's lawyer need not comment because the Nebraska Supreme Court did all the commenting necessary. This is one article that I hope we as Black people will listen to. It's from a much longer Associated Press article, but I excerpted it for this. And the headline, COVID-19 claims number of Black morticians. Losses leave holes in their communities. And the morticians are burying people who had COVID, and there is nothing the morticians feel they can do other than take the bodies, observe what precautions they can, and sometimes they're not even notified. So they are going above and beyond the legal and even moral and ethical duty of a politician by placing their own life and the life of their families and associates at risk by handling bodies of persons who may have died from COVID. But let me read this. This is from Mullins, South Carolina, and it's brief. When the last mourners departed and funeral director Sean Troy was left among the headstones, he wept alone. For 5 decades, the closing words at funerals in this town of 4,400 had been delivered by his father, William Penn Troy Sr. Now the elder Troy was gone, one of many Black morticians claimed by a pandemic that has taken an outsized toll on African Americans, us. We will not listen, though one returns from the dead and speaks to us. At least 95,000 Black Americans have died of COVID. That's according to an Associated Press analysis of data from the National Center for Health Statistics, perishing at the highest rate of any racial group in the US. You understand why I say my people perish for lack of knowledge, too hard-headed to listen. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. You can lead a fool to school, but you can't make him or her think. And there be fools among us. The deaths of Black morticians are particularly notable because of the prominent role they have long played in many communities, often admired for their success in business. A number, including the elder Troy, have been elected to political office, served as local power brokers, and helped fund civil rights efforts. Last summer, both Troys were hospitalized with COVID. The first months after his August death, his father's death, were the hardest. Near sunset recently, Sean Troy paced down a row of headstones, planting tiny flags at an empty plot to mark it for a burial the following morning. Not 50 feet away, shadows stretched across his father's grave. Quote, "I don't think I'll ever get over it," he said, "but I'll get through it." And he'll continue to do it, meaning the work that as a mortician, he feels he should do. Now I come to an article where I'm wondering if the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, have yielded to political pressure and allowed that pressure to nullify the dictates of science and medicine. CDC drops quarantine distancing guidance. The change has come more than 2.5 years after the start of the COVID pandemic. This is an Associated Press item. The nation's top public health agency relaxed its COVID-19 guidelines Thursday, dropping the recommendation. The CDC doesn't issue dictates, they make recommendations based on the science. Dropping the recommendations that Americans quarantine themselves if they come into close contact with an infected person. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention also said people no longer need to stay at least 6 feet away from others. If it was right then, it's right and sensible now. I'm giving my opinion. The changes, which come more than 2.5 years after the start of the pandemic, are driven by a recognition that an estimated 95% of Americans 16 and older, but younger people have gotten COVID. But let me read. 95% of Americans 16 and older have acquired some level of immunity, either from being vaccinated or infected, agency officials said. some degree of immunity? Quote, the current conditions of this pandemic are very different from those of the last 2 years, unquote, said the CDC's Greta Massetti, an author of the guidelines, these new guidelines that I think put people at risk if they're followed. Many places around the country long ago abandoned social distancing and cautions, but some of the changes could be particularly important for schools, which resume classes this month in many parts of the country, and children are notorious carriers and spreaders. They can deliver it to their parents, to family members, and anybody who comes into that home. Perhaps the biggest education-related change is the end of the recommendation that schools do routine daily testing, although that practice can be reinstated in certain situations during a surge in infections, officials said. Why wait until a surge of infections when you know that the cause of the infection is still rampant? If the cause is there, the effect is going to show up. And then after people come down with the COVID, you go back to testing. In other words, after the horse has left the barn and run away, then you close the barn door and lament and cry and say, I should have done it while the horse was still there. Going back to the article, the CDC also dropped a quote, test to stay, unquote, recommendation, which said students exposed to COVID-19 could regularly test instead of quarantining at home. To keep attending schools, it's more important in the view of some people that they attend school than they do the regular testing or quarantining at home. With no quarantine recommendation anymore, the testing option disappeared also. No quarantining, no testing. How do you know who has it? You'll find out when they spread it to somebody else. And if they spread it to other students, then it spreads to the teacher. The teacher takes it home. The children take it home. And Cyrus the virus, extremely desirous of raging like uncontrolled fire. Cyrus the virus did pen on papyrus, would that all humans expire. And humans are helping to contribute to their own expiration. Continuing the article, masks continue to be recommended only in areas where community transmission is deemed high, or if a person is considered at high risk of severe illness. How do you know these things? You think people, I'm not going to go through all that. School districts across the U.S. have scaled back their COVID-19 precautions in recent weeks, even before the latest guidance was issued. Some have promised a return to pre-pandemic schooling. Masks will be optional in most districts when classes resume this fall. And some of the nation's largest districts have dialed back or eliminated COVID-19 testing requirements. No masks, no testing. Public schools in Los Angeles are ending weekly COVID-19 tests, instead making at-home tests available to families. Suppose the families are against vaccinations. They don't believe there's a COVID-19 virus in the first place. So you send it to them, and right into the trash, these testing items go. Schools in North Carolina's Wake County also dropped weekly testing. Some others have moved away from the test to stay programs that became unmanageable during surges of the Omicron variant last school year. The American Federation of Teachers, one of the nation's largest teachers unions, said it welcomes the guidance, and when their teachers come down with the virus, what then? Who will the teachers blame? Quote, every educator and every parent starts every school year with great hope, and this year even more so, unquote. said President Randy Weingarten, president of the Teachers Union. After 2 years of uncertainty and disruption, we need as normal a year as possible so we can focus like a laser on what kids need. The first thing kids need is safety. They need their health, and they need precautions that be taken by school officials, and not like Uvalde in Texas, where precautions were not taken in the schools, and those children were slaughtered. And even while the slaughtering was going, there were dozens of law enforcement of people in the building. But when they heard the shooting, they fled, and the children died in a school. Let me continue. The new recommendations prioritize keeping children in school as much as possible, said Joseph Allen, director of Harvard University's Healthy Building Program. Previous isolation policies forced millions of students to stay home from school, he said, even though the virus poses a relatively low risk to young people. Relatively low? What do you mean by relative? It's a risk, but it could be greater. Children should not be placed at risk because of the stupidity, the silliness of adults. And I quote from the man I quoted earlier, parents are the very ones who should not have children. Now, those guidelines drop these requirements August the 12th. What was going on a few months before this? Well, what was going on in May? COVID cases at highest level in 3 months. So I guess they figure from May, there's a song. Oh, it's a long, long while from May to December, but the leaves turn brown when you reach September. These problems that were existing in May did not disappear between May and August. Fewer than 90 days. But let me read this. Nebraska COVID-19 cases are back on the rise, with the number of cases last week reaching the highest level in 3 months. The state reported 1,500 new virus cases last week. This is in May, a short few months ago. A sharp increase from just over 800 each of the 2 previous weeks, according to figures compiled from U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention data. That data was given to the CDC, and after getting that data, the CDC put out these provisions to no longer require, well, I read the article. It was Nebraska's 5th straight weekly increase and put cases at their highest level since February. So they're undoubtedly higher now. When it's on an upswing, it's going to continue until something stops that motion. And the motion is upward. And at the time the motion of infections, hospitalizations, and deaths moving in that direction, the CDC is saying, stop. You'll go this far and no farther. CDC greases the skids so it can move faster. Nebraska's 2-week case growth of 86%, it grew by 86%, exceeded the 61% US figure and ranked in the top 3rd among the states. But Nebraska's per capita case rate continues to rank in the bottom tier nationally, 41st among the states. That's still high. Hospitalizations in Nebraska also are creeping up, averaging 69 last week compared to 55 the week before. but they remain relatively low, still half the levels they were just 2 months ago, but they're going up again. Maybe it's like a roller coaster. If it goes down, but then it's coming up, you should take precautions based on when it's coming up rather than set a policy when it's on the downgrade and you know it's going to upgrade again. Nationally, the increase in cases is being driven by the subvariant BA2. That's what COVID did. They're going to watch my left hand, then I'll get them with my right hand. Tennessee Ernie Ford said 16 tons, one fist of my left fist of iron, the right one is steel. If the left one doesn't get you, the right one will. If regular COVID doesn't get you, then the subvariant will. The subvariant BA 2.12.1, which reportedly is more transmissible than BA2, has taken over in places such as New York and New Jersey. This subvariant is in Nebraska, and it's more transmissible. But my saying it with emphasis is not going to make any difference. But that's the way human beings operate. Continuing, it's widely recognized that new cases of the virus are being underreported as more people rely on at-home tests. Those results typically are not reported to health agencies. In Nebraska, BA2 made up 89% of positive virus samples that had been genomically sequenced, according to the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services report last week. However, the state currently is not distinguishing between BA2 and BA2.12.1 in its reports. So they don't know whether it's this one or that one, but they're both parts of this subvariant. A tiny percentage of samples sequenced were the BA4 and BA5 subvariants of Omicron, which are driving a surge in South Africa. Can't you learn from what is happening other places? Or won't you learn? None are so blind as those who will not see. Health officials continue to urge all eligible Americans, including those who have had COVID-19 at some point during the pandemic, to get up to date on vaccines. For everyone aged 12 and older, that means one booster in addition to the original series of vaccines. People 50 and older and those who are immunocompromised can get a fourth shot. The CDC's online tool outlines who can get boosters. Nebraska also added 18 more deaths last week, bringing the total number of confirmed or probable COVID deaths to 4,234. The state has reported 482,000 confirmed COVID cases, and under these circumstances that obtained in May, the CDC relaxed requirements, safety requirements. So let's go from May to August. Or July, because this is August. May, June, July. 2 months after this, I read, COVID numbers continue steady climb. And this one, COVID cases at highest level in 3 months in May, and in July, that climb is continuing. Both COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations continued their months-long climb in Nebraska last week, prompting one pandemic expert to say Nebraskans should get booster shots, resume masking, and avoid crowds in an effort to slow the spread of virus. You avoid large crowds, you have social distancing of 6 feet, and you wear masks. And with all that, the CDC drops quarantine and distancing guidelines. Let me continue. The state reported 4,030 new cases last week, up from 3,535 the previous week. The week before that, according to data from the Federal Centers for Disease Control. In Lancaster County, the increase prompted Lincoln officials on Thursday to require city employees to mask when interacting with coworkers and members of the public or in meetings with more than 2 people. The Lincoln Journal-Star reported that the move marked the first time since February that Lincoln City employees have had to wear a mask. They're masking up, and the CD is saying, don't worry about it, ain't no big thing. Douglas County recently moved into the medium category for transmission under CDC community levels, which are based on hospital capacity and case counts. The county recorded 747 cases from Thursday to Sunday. Thursday, let's count Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. An average increase of nearly 187 a day. And CDC is saying, relax these standards. And in schools, relax the standards. And little children are notorious carriers. What kind of policy will be adopted by OPS? We'll wait and see. And parents, rather than those idiots who've been going and disrupting school board meetings with false allegations about there being no COVID, or that the vaccines cause COVID, or that the vaccines contain computer chips that allow the person who gets the vaccination to be tracked by computers run by the government, instead of letting those yahoos or yahoos, as you will, dominate these school board meetings. Parents who are concerned, not just for their children, but for themselves. Parents whose children will come home from a classroom where there are no precautions taken and health standards have been relaxed, and the parents themselves may be infected. What is going on in this place? As was said at one point, the lunatics have taken over the asylum. But let me continue. Hospitalization in Nebraska due to COVID-19 also continued a steady climb. And at this point, I've kind of gone over. I'm going to have to call it a day. And as the canary says, who finds out the cage door is ajar, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching the Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.